So we've all heard of OpenClaw, but now there's a new AI agent on the block, and some users, they're switching to it for its ability to self-learn and improve itself. It's called Hermes Agent, and by the end of this video, you'll know the key differences between the two, and whether or not it's worth your time to switch from OpenClaw to this entirely, or why you might even consider running them both at the same time. And of course, I'll even show you how to set up your own Hermes Agent in your own virtual private server. Sunny here, and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, I teach you everything AI, whether it's vibe coding your next unicorn app or automating your life with AI agents. So if that sounds cool, subscribe and hit the like button, and I'll make sure to keep them coming. But before we jump into the comparison, a huge shout out to our friends over at Hosting for sponsoring today's video. Because of them, you're going to be able to deploy your Hermes agent very shortly with one-click deployment. It's super easy, super secure, and it's going to save you a ton of time. More on that in just a bit. Now, the funny part about this is I actually created this entire page using OpenClaw, so I could go ahead and visually show you how the two differ. But let's go ahead and dive into step by step. The first thing is that OpenClaw requires no introduction. It's got a huge community. They've got 360,000 stars, whereas Hermes Agent is actually very rapidly growing at 96,000 stars, but it's definitely not at the scale yet of what OpenClaw has achieved. And simply put, if you have more people working on your project, chances are you're going to get more updates more frequently, which naturally leads to more people forking, working on the project, adding new features and so forth. So just know that it's more likely that OpenClaw is going to get upgraded quicker than Hermes Agent, which is actually run by the guys over at Noose Research. And then we have the ecosystem. So this is actually one of the biggest misconceptions I actually want to clear up right now. Guys, skills can be used across any AI agent. It doesn't matter where the skill comes from. Lots of times I see tutorials talking about skills as if they're only applicable for one agent, for example, Claw Hub versus maybe another skills directory. No, a skill is literally just an MD file, possibly with some reference files, and you can go ahead and install them on any AI agent system. It's absolutely independent of the system. A skill should be able to be installed anywhere. So I want to highlight that here, whether it's Skills Hub, whether it's community repos, whether it's your own skill that you actually created, you can go ahead and run them on both of these systems. But the main differentiator, and honestly the reason why most people are trying out Hermes Agent in the first place, is actually the self-learning loop. Now, what is that loop and how does that work? Well, think of it this way, right? You go ahead and you start a task, and without being another, generic tutorial, I use it all the time for myself in the business for example, scripting the YouTube videos, or maybe going ahead and reviewing code that I'm about to push for our client projects, wherever it might be, but that's how I'm internally using it. Now, when you go ahead and start that task for the first time, it essentially has a fresh slate. So it's going to go ahead and create essentially like a draft of what it did. Then it's going to go ahead and start noticing patterns a few times. So this typically gets executed around I believe the limit is after 5 skills are called, then it starts to go ahead and identify, okay, I just did a certain workflow, let me record that. Now, once it does that, it will save it as a skill, and then slowly, using a special genetic algorithm, you can dive into the documentation, but basically, it's going to go ahead and improve itself over time. So in short, the more that you do that specific task, it's going to go ahead, spot the patterns, reuse the skill, refine it, and every single time you use it, it's going to slowly get better and better. And this is what compounds. And this is the biggest differentiator because this is the only agent which actually does that natively out of the box. OpenClaw, however, is different. You do the task, it logs it to memory, and then, for example, you can tell it to save it as a skill. You can pull in skills from elsewhere, like I said, install them from a marketplace. But the point is that on this side over here with OpenClaw, it's either a human writing a skill or you're installing a skill from elsewhere. Of course, Hermes can do that, but in this case, it's actually creating the skills on the fly itself. So that's the biggest differentiator between these two. And that is why I would say probably worth giving it a try for certain use cases. And that leads me on to the second differentiator, which is how the actual memory system works. Because this was actually one of the biggest reasons why when I was getting my AI to help me write scripts from OpenClaw, as it grew bigger and bigger and bigger, the memory got more bloated, more noisy, and the script quality became less, even with a multi-agent setup. This is something I'm hoping Hermes will help us solve, but let's dive into how that works. So on the left-hand side, you can see we've got the Hermes agent. So in this case, this is a very intentional setup, right? And basically all this means is it's by design very, very lean. So you can see here, 1,300 tokens or so, and it just loads the memory and the user MD, right? So these are just 2 MD files, nothing else is loaded, okay? Now, OpenClaw, on the other hand, has a memory MD file, and this can actually grow quite big, and it's basically like a long-term memory that slowly develops, and then it would pull in the today's memory and also yesterday's memory as a standard. Now, you can customize it. There are things like QMD and other setups you can have with OpenClaw to make it smart that I've actually set up myself, but it tends to get a bit more, bloated from the get-go of a conversation. Now, when you start to have a conversation with Hermes or OpenClaw, that's the moment where things differ. So to set the tone, Hermes is a lot more leaner. And that was actually by design to reduce noise. So when you start off with a fresh Hermes chat, it's going to be very lightweight, very small. That is actually easy to handle for an LLM. LLMs have something called prompt caching. So in this case, it would really nicely hold on to that, which means you're not bloated from the get-go of a conversation. Whereas OpenClaw, from the start, you could actually get more and more bloated over time. And I found that I had to prune my memory MD file, and that gets kind of annoying after a little bit of time. Then, of course, if we need more information, both systems have a way of searching to go ahead and get that information. So that leads me over to the next section. Let's dive into each example. So when we ask the question, for example, what port did we use for staging SSH last month? Hermes works one way, right? So it's a lot more lightweight. So what's always in the prompt is those two lightweight files, right? So they have stricter memory caps on what they allowed you to get to, right? And that's actually by design, like I said. Right. And then, of course, if it's not in the memory MD or it's not in the user MD, and this is pretty much preferences usually, memory MD is usually like the really important things. If it's not in there, then it will perform a search. Okay. So step one, checks the sticky notes, basically the two files that are loaded. All right. If it's already in the prompt, it's really quick. Step two, if it's not there, it will run a search in its vector database. And then number three, if it finds it, it summarizes it, right? And typically that would be, there's an LLM. Gemini Flash is the default way that they do that. And then it handles an answer, right? Whereas OpenClaw is slightly different, right? So the vector search fires automatically, which means that it can pull a lot more like older pages, right? So if I said, for example, what port did we use for staging SSH last month? To an LLM, it's going to go ahead and try and find maybe where I mentioned port or staging or SSH, right? It's going to go and just pull all of those kind of memories that could have included those words and patterns. That's typically how this stuff works at a high level, right? Then the pages come together. So effectively, imagine you've got your pages here together. Now, after that, it will read what it was pulled in, plus it will add that onto today's memory, yesterday's memory, and that memory MD file. So already you've got quite a lot of bloat before it's able to go ahead and give you an answer. Now, that's not the worst thing because that actually means you get quite rich context, which is why OpenClaw is pretty damn awesome. But you often also get extra noise. And that is what I was saying before is as I've grown my business and as I'm using these things even more, I'm using my AI, like my OpenClaw setup for a lot of things. I have a team of 8 AI agents using, OpenClaw, and those work together amazingly. But as I've grown the systems out, it has gotten noisy over time. And this has definitely been a pain point, which has drawn me towards Hermes for a couple of areas where I'm starting to try things out. Okay, so next let's look at what's similar in each of these so you guys can get a clear understanding of what is actually different between the two, besides what I talked about with the self-learning loop and the memory access, right? So both have pretty awesome tool uses, right? So in this case, you got 47 tools in Hermes. By now you can go into the OpenClaw website. They have tons of tools that get installed with it. Then you've got obviously, the different registries and the different skill hubs. And as I mentioned, that's really not applicable. In this case, AI just pulled that together, but you can install skills from anywhere. So it really doesn't matter. Both have ways of accessing MCP servers if you need to. Both have ways of accessing plugins. The main difference is, like I talked about, that self-learning loop. So whenever it comes to skills in OpenClaw, typically if I do a certain repeated workflow over and over again, I will say, okay, maybe I should make a skill which helps me publish, that workflow, which was maybe like a very popular one that I use over and over again, is how I publish my content to Instagram, YouTube, and all, TikTok and all these different platforms. So I created that into a skill so I could reuse it over and over again. If you want to know how I do all of that, by the way, I've got an awesome community that I'm starting up. You can feel free to check the link out in the description, sign up and see how we do it. But in Hermes, however, you wouldn't actually have to do that. You would just simply execute that task. Because that task would likely have more than 5 different steps inside of it, it would trigger off the self-learning workflow and then it would likely create a skill on its own. Right? So this is where things really start to differ. Okay. And then as we use things out, they're going to go ahead and refine. So this I actually really like. I created this to make it like super, super simple for you to understand. So imagine how things, this is really going to describe well how things are going to progress, right? So day one, our Hermes agent is born. So this is going to be today for you guys. Effectively, let's go ahead and say we were deploying an API. Okay. So when we first use it, effectively all that an LLM or AI knows is that there's a bunch of steps. There's step 1, 2, and 3. We're going to build the image, push maybe, and then restart our server, whatever it looks like. Okay. And as you can see, typically the trigger is after 5 or more tool calls. Okay. So that's when it will basically say, okay, he done, a bit of a task here. I should probably maybe create a skill around that. Right. So at this point, we have this skill, deploy API MD. Now in day 7, I decided to use it again, or throughout the week I've been using it, and every day it's doing that self-learning approach. And now you can see as we used it, so the agent used it noticed a missing step, it patched the skill in flight, and now we basically got a more stronger skill. Okay, so now it could have been, for example, run tests first, right? And then a health check step. So these two made it a bit more stronger. Then, of course, the more and more we use it, it starts to get even more and more nicer. And this is typically where we start seeing things like pitfalls, verification steps that get introduced. And then, of course, again, like say in double the amount of time after 1 month, you've got a really, really nice, smooth working Hermes workflow, right? And this is, if you're interested in how this works, you can actually read their documentation. But effectively, we have this iterative process where in the beginning, this skill is effectively, like level 1, let's say, and then it goes to level 2, level 3, level 4, and every single time we use it over time, it's basically getting better. And this is the compounding effect that we have in Hermes, which we just simply don't have in OpenClaw, right? Unless you specify your own setup. So do I improve my skills over time in OpenClaw? Yes. But are they also getting stagnant, which is why my scripts get out of touch after a while? Then yeah, they do. So in this case, this natively fixes that with Hermes. Now, the next thing I really wanted to talk about was multi-agents. So this is probably been the biggest game changer moment for me when it came to these AI agent systems. Hermes doesn't do what OpenClaw can do. Okay, so I want to keep that very, very clear. OpenClaw, we can use, let me just remove that for a second. OpenClaw, we can have our different channels, for example, Slack, Telegram, email, and this, Hermes can have different channels as well. But we send a message and it goes to something called the gateway. And the gateway basically can send messages out to these different agents. So we can have individual specific agents that can basically exist. But the difference between the two is that these agents can actually communicate with each other by using something called sessions_send, right? So this right here, sessions_send, is what allows us to do it. And a big thing that I also like in OpenClaw is you can have channel binding. So for example, in Slack, I can have, only agent A will reply from Slack. If I was sent to send the email, or Discord, maybe, this agent would only reply and so forth. You can have really kind of bespoke setups. But the main way that I use this is I have a team of 8 and they can all talk to each other. So my research agent, for example, can talk to my ops agent can speak to my review agent, however the setup is. And they're actually speaking between each other to go ahead and maybe like pull information to solve the problem. Hermes, however, is different. It can spawn sub-agents, and we can actually have something called profiles. So where we have a research agent, for example, we can actually do that technically inside of Hermes. If we look at the documentation, we can actually see that you can actually create multiple agent profiles, but they're independent of one another. So they're completely isolated Hermes environments, right? Now you can implement shared memory systems. I can get into that, maybe if you guys are interested in that, I can maybe create a video on that by using something like Obsidian. That's how I do it. However, the reality is that a parent agent, for example, the one agent that we're going to create today, that can only spawn sub-agents to do tasks on its behalf. And basically, maybe like we want to speed the execution up, we can spawn 3 parallel agents, but they can't have communication between them. This one's memory and execution, context is completely separate to this one, is completely separate to this one. Whereas over on OpenClaw side, it's not the case, right? They can actually talk to each other and they can stay alive. Whereas this one is kind of like a sub-agent 3 is going to run, report back to the parent agent, and then it's going to die. Right, so that's effectively how it works. And it also has maximum number of agents, which I believe is 3, whereas OpenClaw has a much larger number of agents that can run. Now, after using these systems for a long amount of time, I can actually tell you that this is actually kind of smart that they don't let you do this, because if you don't set this up right, you're actually going to create a mess. And I've seen so many people do it wrong. It took me a very long time to get my setup actually right. And that's actually what I'm teaching now inside the community. But whereas this actually makes it less likely that you're going to make that mistake. So I actually completely don't disagree with this approach only. Okay, so based on that, the golden question is, but Sonny, which agent should I use, or should I use both of them? What do you recommend that I do? So in this case, I created like a little bit of a 30-second takeaway. Now, in my opinion, I'm using both, right? Full transparency, I'm using both of them. Again, both agents have skills, MCPs, and plugins. So just very simply get those kind of misconceptions out the window. The main things that differentiates these two is that the Hermes agent genuinely on its own will get better over time. Whereas OpenClaw, it's really dependent on how you interact with it. If you don't know what you're doing with it, you can actually make it like relatively just stay the same and not improve over time. Whereas if you know what you're doing with it and you come to really get into the grips of maybe upgrading the memory system or doing the things which they do actually allow you to do, then you can get somewhere with it. But Hermes is a lot more, it just does it from the get-go. Another thing is it's lightweight by default, right? So by default, like I said in the beginning, it doesn't pull all of the memory, by picking out what it might be similar from the past. It simply will just have the bare minimum and it will just go and fetch things as it needs to. And that means that effectively you're going to have a cheaper execution when you're using it. Whereas OpenClaw can get bloated quite quickly. I've actually experienced that a lot myself, and I built a whole mission control system so I can see exactly what's going on, which is actually incredible, and it helped me do a lot of things. But again, I had to build that because I noticed that bloat was happening. And of course, in my opinion, beyond everything else on the screen right now is multi-agent setup. So if you do want to go down the route of, I want to specifically have, different multi-agents inside of my, for example, Telegram, and I want them to talk to each other, then that's more likely to go towards OpenClaw. However, what I would actually recommend, and this is what I'm doing right now, is actually this. So if you can see, this is actually my Telegram channel right here. And I've created a separate topic, which is only for Hermes. And you can see my actual OpenClaw agent is actually introducing itself to the Hermes agent inside of the community, which is actually pretty cool. So it's trying to tell it like Neo is the chief of staff, the main OpenClaw agent. Then I have all of these additional ones, which help me do a bunch of stuff like coding, script writing, and so forth. And then we've got the humans, me and Jay. And of course, in Hermes, I can go ahead and simply talk to it. So in this case, I was just asking a bunch of different questions just to see what it could do effectively. But if you go up here, another thing that I actually really do like about it from the get-go is that if I was to go ahead and say, in this case, I was trying to get it to mess around with one of my scripts. One thing I really like here, guys, is you can see it shows tool usage, which OpenClaw does not, by the way. So if you're talking in Telegram, OpenClaw doesn't show you the tool usage. It just simply says thinking, like Neo is thinking, for example, and then it will reply. Whereas Hermes actually lets you go ahead and see the output. Every single little emoji is going to be a different tool that's basically being used. And if I was to message it during its response, it interrupts the thread. Whereas with OpenClaw, and this gets quite annoying at times, especially when you get really big workloads, it doesn't do that. And that gets very, very frustrating. So I would highly recommend in this case, even if you have got an OpenClaw team, you can actually go ahead and introduce a Hermes agent inside of that to go ahead and have that working alongside. I have an OpenClaw running on my Mac Mini, and then I have a Hermes agent running on a BPS server right now. And the final part, of course, was how it accesses memory. So you can dive into those as you wish, but you can see the main really takeaway here is that Hermes, the self-learning loop, is something which I believe is going to separate it quite a lot from OpenClaw, unless OpenClaw can come up with something. They are coming up with Dreaming. So Dreaming has recently been introduced, but it's not the same as the self-development loop that Hermes is by, native nature implemented from the get-go. And of course, if you do go ahead and have a setup like this, you can do two really cool things. One is that Hermes actually allows you to migrate OpenClaw agents over to Hermes. So you can actually do that and keep your OpenClaw agents alive if you want to. So you can actually start maybe like port over the skills and so forth. But if you want to have both existing, and this is what I'm doing right now, that's when I mentioned something like Obsidian. So I actually have a shared second brain system where I have Obsidian as our core, and then I have basically Hermes that can go ahead and write to that Obsidian. OpenClaw can write to that Obsidian. If you want to know how that all works, then drop a comment down below or join my community in the link in the description. And I'll either go ahead and create a video or I'll cover it inside the community. So let me know in the comments down below. But of course, we've talked about the differences. You want to get this up and running on your own system. And that is where our friends over at Hostinger have actually helped us a ton, because they have a one-click setup, which has made it super easy. And I've actually gone ahead and modified it slightly as well. So you literally cannot screw this up, right, by following this tutorial. And I find that a lot of tutorials online don't cover this part. So I'm actually going to go ahead and show you how you can set this up foolproof. So the first thing is that actually if you go to the first link in the description, you'll reach the Hostinger link. So we have got a nice little setup with them right now where we're saving you 10%, which is awesome, right? But if you go to the VPS plan on the right, you can see over here, you can actually select your plan. KVM2, I honestly think is enough, but you can feel free if you want to maybe run NAN workflows, whatever you want to basically have on your server, you can do that. But by using this one-click setup, you literally can go ahead and click on deploy, and it will handle all of the technical setup for you. And this is one of my favorite reasons why I've been using Hostinger for my own VPS servers, because it just makes the whole thing a lot easier. So all you need to do is go ahead, select your plan, click deploy. So the first thing you're going to do is just simply select your period. So we've got 1 month, 12 month, 24 month. If you click on 24 months, you actually get the cheapest rate. And of course, your boys hooked you up. If you go ahead and use coupon code SUNNY, you'll save an additional 10% off. And as you can see over here, you just simply need to go ahead and select a server location. Now, personally, I've actually found that whenever I have any VPS servers, I've had the best experience by selecting the US. I'm not sure a reason why that exactly is. I think it's mainly because maybe the OpenAI servers or the Claude servers are over there, but it seems to be a bit more faster for me from my experience, right? So you can go ahead and even enable daily backup if you want. But once you've configured everything, you don't need to do anything else. You can simply go ahead, hit the coupon code Sunny and click on continue to check out. Now, once you've done that, you're going to go ahead and land over the dashboard. You'll get a pop-up actually appear on the screen, and it will be either to input your username and password for your Hermes login. And I've seen a couple of users have that, including myself. That's what I had. Or you'll get a pop-up, which I've seen other users get from other tutorials, where it basically shows an OpenAI key and a couple of keys that you can just go ahead and pop in. But either way, I'm going to show you how to do the whole thing. But if you do ever make a mistake, so I'm going to show you how you can restart it as well. You can simply just go to operating systems and panels, because I feel like people don't show the mistake part. But if you click on application over here, you can simply go ahead and select whichever application you want, including OpenClaw. I'm going to simply click on Hermes Agent. And then, like I said, look, you put in admin username, Hermes, and then you want to put in a password. So I'm going to go ahead and pop in a password like so, and click on next. And in this case, this is going to go ahead and install Hermes Agent using Docker onto hosting, and we just click on deploy and it's done. Now, again, this is because I had already done it, but you'll just go ahead and get that initial pop-up after you complete the checkout page process. But I think it's worth showing you this part, because in case you make any mistakes and you really get yourself in a bit of a pickle, which I doubt you will because it's very easy to navigate, then you simply can go ahead and restart this way. And in this case, while the VPS is recreating, yours will be deploying. Might as well talk about why you want to have this on the VPS in the first place. The first most obvious reason, guys, is that this is AI agents that we're talking about. They're non-deterministic. They can do wild things if you don't use them the correct way. If I was to put this on my own computer and for whatever reason we got a prompt injection attack, or my AI just went rogue for whatever reason, it could go ahead and delete all of my files, maybe get access to sensitive information and basically publish that to the internet. We just don't know what this thing could do. So you always want to run it in an isolated environment. And also by using something like hosting, things like our credentials, our API keys, everything is kept secure. Your data is protected and everything is nicely kept away from our main machine. This is the way you must set it up when you're using this stuff, promise you. And that is why even if you're using a Mac Mini, a VPS, whatever it might be, keep it separate to your main machine. And also things like cron jobs, that self-learning loop. If your machine was to turn off, for example, when I close my laptop lid, then our AI agent won't be able to execute. So of course we need the machine to be 24/7 on and available at all times. This is why a VPS like this is perfect. And also when you set it up this way, you don't need to know anything about Docker. So in this case, you can see that the project is being deployed. I didn't need to know about Docker. I didn't need to know about Traefik. And what this is actually pretty cool is they're actually securing the gateway in front of our Docker. So by default, now it's going to be a lot more secure than if you were to maybe host your own server, online or whatever the case. So they've handled that. They've got you covered. You can just go ahead and focus on clicking that deploy button and then just using the agent without the headache. They also actually made a pretty awesome guide. If you just type in Hermes Agent hosting in Google, you'll pop up on this article right here. And you can see that we ran through the deployment step, and then afterwards it runs through how to access it. You can go ahead and just CD into it. I'm going to show you both ways. You can either basically SSH from any kind of terminal. You see everything is deployed. Awesome stuff, right? Now we have a Docker manager and we have everything nicely set up. Okay, so what I want you to do is go ahead and click on Docker manager, and you can see we have a Hermes agent, and you can see this is up and running, right? So the first thing is that we can click on open, and this will actually open up an SSH window to get things set up. Now, before I do this, I also want to show you something. So I want to show you, if we go to the manage button over here, you can actually manage and see all of your environment variables. And I like this because you get full transparency over how everything is set up. So here we can see our environment variables, admin username, admin password, and Traefik host. And of course, they're a bit hidden there. And then you've got your Docker configuration here. And this is basically the Docker container. And a thing I like about this is you didn't have to know any of this, right? It will restart if it stops by itself. So this is pretty awesome. You don't need to worry about any of this stuff. If you ever have any issues, you can redeploy it there. But we're going to go back, and we can either at this point click on terminal or simply access. I'm going to click on the open here. And I'm going to type in Hermes because I didn't change the username. And then I want you to pop in the password that you would have set. And then click sign in. Now, once you've done that, it will go ahead and actually pop up. Let me zoom in. It'll pop up a auto setup configuration screen. So here we can either do a full setup or a quick. I'm going to do a quick setup. And then you can see we need to give it a provider. So this is the LLM, the AI provider. So I'm going to use OpenAI Codex today. And in this case, you can see it goes ahead and it gives us the following authentication URL. So pop this into a web browser and then go ahead and authenticate yourself. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. Go ahead and click on continue, and then go ahead and pop in the character code and click continue, and then we're signed in. Then head back over, it will say login successful, and we can select from the model. And now at the time of this video, GPT-5.4 is the latest, so I'm going to go ahead and use that. And then we have to set up our messaging. Now this is actually a lot easier than you think. I would recommend, quite honestly, that you use Telegram. It's pretty awesome, but you can use Discord, Slack. A few of my students use the others over here, like Discord and Slack. But I'm going to press space to toggle, and you can toggle a couple and it'll run you through all the steps. But I want to do Telegram in this instance. And then we have to give it a Telegram bot token. Okay, so what I want you to do is open up Telegram, and then I want you to go over to the BotFather. So simply start a chat with the username BotFather. I know it's kind of weird, but in this case, there you go. And then all I need you to do is go ahead and type in /new bot. Okay. Oh, and I actually created a new bot, more than 20 bots. Oh, and I've actually hit the limit on the number of bots that I can have. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and reuse one of my old bots. So once you've done basically new bot, you'll go ahead and actually get this command. So it'll say, all right, give it a name. And then you simply just have to name it with _bot at the end of it. Then it'll give you a token. You want to copy this token right here. And then you want to go ahead and paste in the token like so. Okay. Now, next up, it'll say you need to give your user ID, and your user ID is not your username. Very different things. So what you can actually do is you need to message at user info bot. Okay. So if you go to message user info bot, you'll reach this bot over here. What I then need you to do is go ahead, and at the bottom, you'll see this little pull out here. So I want you to click on user, and you want to go ahead and pop in your own name. So I'm going to go ahead and put in my own name. Now, the first time you click start and message this bot, it will actually go ahead and give you your ID. So in this case, I've got my ID here. I'm going to copy my ID. And I'm going to simply paste it in. If you want to allow several IDs, you can simply go ahead and just separate them by comma. So I'm then going to go ahead and click on OK next. And then it will ask us, do you want to use this as your home channel? What that means is basically if I have any kind of scheduled function, so like a cron job, which basically means like if I want to get, for example, a news report delivered to me every single evening or every morning when I wake up, what's the home channel that it should be sent to? And in this case, my DM, so my user DM, is going to be the home channel. So we're going to say yes. And it could be maybe a group chat or whatever the case. You want to be very careful with group chats. But there you have it, right? Once we've done that, it says setup complete. All your files are ready to go. And all I want you to do after that is type in Hermes, right? So type in Hermes, and then it will say, do you want to launch? Oh, sorry, I forgot to do it. It says launch chat now. Well, I've jumped the gun. Right, so first you just want to go ahead and click on yes. So just simple yes. And then it will launch the Hermes chat. And there we go. To be honest, it's actually a really nice chat, right? So over here, you can see we got the Hermes chat interface. And then you can basically just go ahead and do a / to see all the different commands, or you can just type in hi. And if you used to go ahead and start seeing it, thinking and giving a response, you connected things up correctly. A couple of things to notice. You can see the model here. And this is also the context window. So in this case, the base was 10,000 tokens, and then we've got up to 1.1 million. We can see the percentage used and also the time of the overall conversation. But of course, I don't really want to be using it like this, right? I'm not going to be SSHing in and using it this way every single time. So I'm going to press Control C. Once we've gone ahead and, exited with Control C, we'll see the following, and then if you just type in ls, you can see we get all of our files and so forth. Now, what we need to do is in order to message on Telegram, so if I go to my actual bot right now, so this is my actual bot right here. So in this case, if I was to send a message from this bot to here, it's not going to reply right now because nothing is running. Right? And that's the actual biggest thing, which I don't see a lot of people talk about. Okay, so I realized they can't connect the same bot that I already have active. So I've set up a second bot. And in this case, I followed everything the same way over again. I just ran a setup to go ahead and get back into the setup routine. And you might have to do that, honestly, if you run into any issues. So it's probably a good thing to show you. But at this point now, if I want to actually message it on my Telegram, if I go over here and I click on start and I simply type in hi, we won't see anything happen. Right, and that's because nothing is actually running now on the server. So in order to get it running, I have to type in, for example, hermes-gateway. And this means the gateway now starts. So if I was to type in hello, we should see that Zeus is now typing. And you can see that it's computing, and that is because the Hermes gateway needs to be running actively. And typically, if you set this up on your own like Mac Mini, it would ask you during setup if you wanted to launch it in the background and restart. But in this case, when you launched it this way, and I don't see many tutorials talk about this with VPS servers, it often doesn't prompt us this in the setup steps about how we keep it running in the background. And of course, you could use something like tmux and all these things, but I'm going to show you a better way in which you can do that, right? So I want you to do Control-C and cut the server. And that means that now if I was to send hi, we won't get a message back because the server's not running, right? So I want you to go back now to the Docker manager. And I'll show you a really nice trick, which I've not actually seen anyone do in a tutorial, right? So in this case, we go to manage, we go over to our Docker, manager, YAML editor. And then we have, for example, our first Docker container. So this is the Hermes agent. So this is actually what was running, right? Now you can use the documentation they gave you earlier. If you were to SSH into the root of your VPS, you would then run this and Docker compose. But again, I'm going to show you a much easier way, honestly. And I don't know why they don't show this quite often. But so all I need you to do is go to the YAML editor, and then we're simply going to go down. And I want you to paste in, so the following command. And I'll actually pop this command down below in the description, or I'll pin it as a comment, right? So we go ahead and do Command V. And now you can see we've got the Hermes gateway, right? So I want to explain the two things. When now the Docker container starts, or, every time it starts or restarts, what we're doing is we're spinning up a Hermes agent. So that way you can go ahead and, if you ever needed to, you can SSH and basically access it like we just did. But we're also going to spin up a Hermes gateway, right? And in this instance, we're also going to say, if it ever stopped, we're going to restart, but we're going to run Hermes gateway run every time, right? And what this will do, and it depends on Hermes agent. So basically it needs this to be running in order to basically run this off the back of it. So that's effectively what we're doing, right? So in this case, look, the Hermes agent is running, and that's our main basically container. And then this one basically just triggers Hermes gateway run in the background, right? And that is it. That is it. And I don't see a single tutorial tell that. And it's so easy, right? You just go ahead and click on deploy now. And just like that, in a couple of moments, we're going to see that gets deployed, and I'll show you how this works. So it takes us back to the screen. Click on the downward button over here, and you can see that both are running. So we can give it a row test. So let's go ahead and speak to Zeus. We can say, yo, what's up? And you can see now Zeus should be running. Hey, there you go. Right? Awesome stuff. And if you ever want to debug it and see if okay, are my containers running? Look at that, perfect stuff, right? And now you can go ahead and talk and say maybe do a test for me using tools. And there you go. Now I can see it's tool calling. So terminal, print tool test, okay. Tool test complete. Okay, tool pipeline's working. There you go. Proof of it's working all great. And if you ever want to debug it, just go into these three dots, click on view logs, and you can actually see the logs of both of those containers. So in this case, you can see the container logs here. You can click on refresh logs as well if you need to go ahead and get refreshed. But the main one that I need you to recognize is Hermes Gateway 1. And here you can see, look at that. There we have it. Just like I was running before, but now it means that our cron, so any kind of, function that needs to run in the background, and our messaging platforms are now running automatically on that Docker container. And then we're pretty much done with our VPS. It was that simple to set up. So now you can go ahead and completely chat to your Hermes agent as you wish, and basically go ahead and start the self-learning loop. So in this case, I believe it's 5 tool calls to go ahead and trigger a self-learning loop. So in this instance, we've already triggered once. So we're going to go ahead and test this out with some kind of task that I want repeating every day. Every single day at 6 a.m. in the morning, I want a full news brief of everything that happened in the tech space and AI space the day before. I want you to check the top 5 most popular RSS feeds, and I want you to go ahead and basically create a curated report for me every single day without fail at 6 a.m. in the morning. And we can see it's already starting to use the skills that it has pre-installed on the machine, right? So it's like the skills, blog watcher, terminal, date, and so forth. So while this is happening, I'm going to show you something pretty cool that we can actually go ahead and do. So if you go back over here and we go to, I'll show you the SSH route now. So we go ahead and click the root password. I'm going to go ahead and warp into it. So you can just use a normal terminal. So we're going to go ahead and simply SSH in like so. And then you'll go ahead and get asked if you want to connect like so. You just want to press yes. You'll add it to the list of hosts, and you need to put in the root password when you reset things. So if you don't know the root password, all you can do is, if you basically didn't remember setting it or whatever the case, go over here, click on change, and you can just put in a new one, right? So in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and pop in that password right now, just like so. And as you can see, we start to show and then we are in. Okay, so you should go ahead and get the following. So what you can then do is actually follow that previous tutorial that I found. So if you ever lose it, you just simply type in this in Google and you'll come to this page. Go down and they've got basically the commands that you need to run. So what I'd recommend is you do cd and you do /docker. And then what I like to do is just hit tab, right? And you can see that it pops up with the ending that you need. So these are two different Docker setups. So we've got Hermes Agent is the one that we want. And then you simply run docker compose like so, okay? So you run docker compose, and now you can see we have opt Hermes, right? So this means that now I'm actually in effectively what I showed you previously. So if I was to run Hermes now we're in the main container and we can basically access everything as we were accessing it before. So you see, everything is in there just like so. So that's basically how you can also SSH in if you ever want to, in case you were wondering, right? So heading back over here, we can see, everything's set up. Very, very nice. Right, so over here, we can see done. I set it up, schedule every day at 6, current time zone, what it will do, check find primary feeds and so forth. And now, to be honest with you, the more and more I interact with it, so I say, actually, I want my update 7 a.m. instead. The more and more we interact with it, slowly, what you'll eventually start to see, and I'm going to switch to my agent now to go ahead and show you this in action. When I was planning this video, for example, I used the actual Hermes agent to help me out with that. And as you can see here, look, when it's going ahead and updating, you'll start to see things like this, where it's memory addition, right? After a certain number of runs, it's going to go ahead and actually start curating skills based on everything we did, maybe script writing skill. And then effectively, the next time I ever come to this task, it will pull from that skill. And every single time we do that, it will iterate on that skill using all of the feedback, the input, the different changes that I kept asking for in the aim so that every time we use that skill, we get a better output. And there we have it, guys. You just created your first own self-improving AI agent with a super simple near zero setup with all of your data being private and protected. And you can use your plans like GPT Pro if you have those. Unfortunately, you can't use Claude Max because those guys were a bit of a killjoy, but you can get it up and running with pretty much any API key, which is one thing that I actually forgot to mention is that Hermes Agent is actually much more supportive of a wider number of providers. So they're a lot more open to, you know, the different things like OpenRouter and all these like sort of, you know, open models as opposed to OpenClaw, which is a bit more closed off to the models that you can actually use. So if you want to go ahead and build your agent, please don't forget to use the first link in the description and use code Sunny to save yourself an extra 10% off when setting up your VPS on Hostinger. Hostinger made it so easy to go ahead and get that up and running. So a big thank you to those guys. And of course, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button and drop a comment about what you want to see. Maybe you want to know about the Obsidian second brain, whatever it might be, let me know down below in the comment section. And with that said, I'll see you in the next one. Peace.